Hello, everyone. Mahalo. Hope everyone is well. Hope you are getting enough sleep, eating your vitamins and your Wheaties. Uh, Good to see you all. I want to just basically touch on some of the readings here, chapter 5 through 8, but I'm not going to touch on a lot of the things you guys touch on. You guys are probably more Common Core experts than I am. Um, but I'm going to briefly touch on those things based on my perspective. But I want to lead in from chapter 4 because I think chapter 4 kind of sets up chapter 5 and goes through. And as Dr. Rutledge said, these things were all kind of setting up what's your philosophy. And I found it was very interesting as we get into critical theorists, especially Marx Gramsci, and this idea of privileged knowledge and us as being intellectuals, how that moves forward. And so when I think about my personal intellectual genealogy, from where I come, my view is very post-colonial, very postmodern in the sense that I look at the relationships between individuals in society and subjects in power and privilege. And so a lot of what I do, a lot of what I investigate comes from that place. And I think when we think about, Common Core, at least when I think about Common Core, I think of it in a post-colonial and colonialist aspects. I think of it as something constructed by intellectual elites, in a sense, and mandated or applied within an educational realm that now must be adhered to without knowledge of the receptors, right? Those who are receiving information. And it kind of ties back into TIAC, right? And this idea of the one best system. What is the one best system? No, there's many best systems. It's got to be pluralistic. We live in a pluralistic society, so therefore we must, in some instances, honor and understand that. And so, chapter 5, what I really enjoyed was Ennis, and then the reasonable reflective thinking focused on deciding what to believe or what to do, right? And that's how we teach, and students obtain information from us and they decide, well, do I like that? Do I not like that? And we do it ourselves, right? And so as a post-colonialist, as a postmodernist, I think I come from a perspective of subjectivism. I believe that that we all come with our own stores of knowledge, and that everything we do comes with some subjective overtone. And I think this kind of bled back for me into chapter 3, when Noddings talks about reasonable method, right? That our social values are kind of embedded within our analysis of education. And this is my view of Common Core in a sense. And I haven't investigated the ins and outs of policy on it. I'll be the first to admit that. But from my view, from my subjective view of Common Core, or any form of educational stricture that, in a sense, mandates or limits, that's how I feel. And I thought it was very interesting when we think about what is critical thinking, right? And that leads us back to Socratic method. And I like that Noddings touches on Socratic method a lot, because it's what I use in my classroom. I don't teach history in a bubble or a vacuum. When I'm teaching history, what I need to know is what they know. I need to know where my students are coming from. I need to know, what did you learn before you got here? How did you learn it? Where does it come from? Not to tell them they're wrong, but just to know. Because if I can know, then I know how to proceed. Not with teaching them, but with finding material that kind of guides them towards a better understanding or better grip of who they are. Because regardless of whether they leave my classroom or not, they're going to have their own perceptions of what they're going to have. And so I felt that was very fitting. And I think this kind of ties into what Noddings says, in that we can no longer study knowledge without studying the knower. And I found that to be very very powerful in the sense, and that's my philosophy of education is that I have to know my students, I have to know where they come from, and they're all different, and so I thought that was very interesting um, in that sense. And so I briefly want to touch on the Piaget argument, or the lack of Vygotsky argument, because I didn't view that as an omission of Vygotsky as a slight, so much as I viewed it as um, a guideline for using Piaget to kind of understand constructivism from the duality of it all, meaning the historical development of knowledge as opposed to developmental growth. So we as humans all construct some form of, we all develop in our knowledge, or how humans develop knowledge, but we individually construct knowledge in different ways. And so I think, I'm not gonna, don't hold me to it, my personal opinion of what Noddings was trying to unearth or illuminate wasn't so much as to omit Vygotsky in the sense of constructivism as it was to just point out the duality of constructivism and everything that it holds. And so I think using Piaget as a landmark in a sense to kind of ground us was what Noddings was going for. But I really enjoyed how that bled into this idea of the shift, right, of incommensurability. Can't believe I got that word in one. Wow. So it's a tough word to say. But this idea of stepping outside our own realms in order to challenge convention. And even within constructivism, I think we do that from those aspects and challenging perceptive norms. And I really found that, of course, leads us back to the Kuhn, right? And I like how the Noddings just kind of connected us back to other readings of the Kuhn and the Tyak, and how it kind of all tied in. And I found it very useful, especially 131, where Noddings kind of goes over the idea for knowledge producing, right? That all forms of educational research be accepted as scientific in the sense that it must be knowledge producing. And this really kind of struck me in that sense that, oh my gosh, does it need to be knowledge producing? Does all forms of research need to be knowledge producing, or does it just need to spawn inquiry? Because I think if we're going to admit that we come to the table with all our subjective views and knowledges, we all have different philosophies of education. How does education move forward with that? With the many different approaches and views that we all have of education, how do we come to a collective consensus of what is good for education, right? It's TIAC, one best system. This is what's best. I think when we look at it from this idea of incommensurability, if we can step outside for a sense, if we're gonna acknowledge that we're gonna come to the table with our own subjective views of education and philosophies of education, if we're gonna admit that, but we can for a moment step outside that box and understand that, and have a conversation, have a dialogue. And I think that's where Socratic method is so important, at least in my personal educational philosophy, because I think in having these conversations, we're able to better understand one another, and understand the reasons for why we do what we do. And so I found this book very. I find myself when I read it skipping back and forth. I find myself going from one chapter in chapter 5 and go, wait a minute, I got to go back to chapter 3 to read that again. And then, oh, wait a minute, I think I just saw that in chapter 6. I found it very kind of useful in that sense. So not in the traditional sense that we've kind of been covering different books, but I also like how it led back to the Tyak and it led back to the Kuhn in this sense. And I really think that looking at my own intellectual genealogy, I have to really admit that the subjectivism and Socratic method really kind of rung true with me and why and how I teach. And so on that note, I'm going to leave you with your thoughts. I want to know what you guys think about those aspects of the book. And namaste. Be well.